we're learning now, coming back to learning after everyone had a Bein Zmanim break with strength and koyach, and we begin learning Perek Chavav, chapter 26 in Tanya. And let me give you a brief recap and update on where we're at. So the Alter Rebbe, on the Sharblat, it's called the title page of Tanya, says that my book, doesn't use those words, I'm paraphrasing that. The Sefer Tanya is about the Pasuk in Parshas Nitzavim, the Torah is near to you, very near to you, in your mouth, in your heart, and to act upon. How is that possible when Gashmias seems to be closer to us than spirituality, Ruchnias, and God and Torah? And the Alter Rebbe focuses really on this pasuk, because this pasuk is not just a specific pasuk verse, it's a general rule, it's a klal. It's a klal that should make every person think, regardless of he's religious, she's not religious. If you're Jewish and you believe in the Torah and that God gave the Torah and gave this to us, it's a very perplexing verse. And why the Alter Rebbe feels that it's important to explain this verse and to really take it apart is because it's real life. The Alter Rebbe was a very practical person with all of his sitkis, and he was a tzaddik, and he was a goyin. I don't have to tell you, he wrote the Shulchan Aruch, and Sfarim, and was a leader of Belarusian Jewry, when a Mendel Vitebsker and a Avram Kalesker left to Eretz Yisrael. They appointed him specifically to be the leader of that region. And when Shlomo Karliner had to leave Beshenkovich because the Misnagdim were really bothering him and made his life miserable. So he wanted to come to the Alter Rebbe's region in Belarus, and the Alter Rebbe gave him 3 conditions. So number 1, we understand that Reb Shlomo, I don't remember now if he was older than the Balatanya or not, but surely he was a very big tzaddik, an accomplished person, and had a following. But he knew to go into Belarusia, where a Mendel Vitebsker and a Avram Kalesker, who were kind of the rebbes of all these of the Alter Rebbe and the Reb Shlomo and others, you need permission. There's a system to this madness. Okay, you just don't come in. You ask for permission. So he asked for permission. And the Alter Rebbe said, my dear Reb Shlomo, I love you, and no problem, but there's 3 conditions. And one of the conditions is, you cannot teach here your approach of tzaddik be'emunoso yichya, that the chosid will live through the koyach of the tzaddik. Meaning, you go to the tzaddik and you get a little shirayim and you get a little bracha and you get a bracha, and basically the tzaddik will schlep you out of your shmutz and your situation. The Alter Rebbe said, no, I see Hasidism, not Chabad, just Chabad. Hasidism at that time was for all of Hasidism, or at least for that region of Hasidism, as requiring avodah b'koyach atzmai, your own work, your own effort. And if you're willing to do that, Reb Shlomo, you're welcome to this region. And if not, I don't give you permission. And guess what? Reb Shlomo was agreeable to two of the 3, I forget now the 2 other conditions, but to this he did not agree. And I understand why he didn't agree. Because there was a contradiction to his approach to Chassidus. Yes, Moshe.
Yeah, Rabbi Dalfin, during the Bein Zmanim, I reached out to you with a question. And the question was, at what point did Chabad Chassidus become formalized as a system?
So the previous Rebbe writes in the genealogy of Hayoim Yoim, and you can all read it yourselves, he gives the date, I didn't look at it, this is my memory, either 1778 when Reb Mendel Vitebsker left, or 1788. So, I'm not going to contradict, who am I, who are we, but nevertheless, it seems like not just academics, but even, Hasidim who have studied all of this, it seems to us that he really started his Shitas Chabad in a public way 10 years later, around Yutes Kislev time. One moment. So we could say that it's not a contradiction. In other words, what the Frierdiker Rebbe writes in the genealogy is that in ideology already he formed his Chabad Shita back then in 1788. But the publicity of it, the manifestation of it, wasn't until 10 years later.
So I just want to say, in the genealogy, I looked it up. Actually, it writes slightly different. I think 1773 said that the Alter began to put things together in terms of the
Okay, that's what. So I meant. Okay, I told you I forgot. 1773 is when the Maggid passed away. So the Frierdiker Rebbe is positioning, is arguing that the Alter Rebbe from then already started to. He took the Maggid's Torah and he felt it should be done through the channels of Chabad. But again, besides that reference, again, I'm not the world's expert, but I do have a little knowledge in this field. It's difficult to find strong support to justify 1773. But that's what it says. So, so the way I reconcile the 20-year difference or so is there's the Shita in ideology, and then there's the Shita as the Shita becomes a public phenomenon. And I think the public phenomenon, I believe, it was not too much later. In other words, this story, for example, with Reb Shlomo Karliner, and the proof is this story, is one of the proofs to what I'm arguing is this story. If it would have been known in the whole region of Russia and Ukraine and Belarusia, right, that the Tanya, he only wants Chabad, the derech of Chabad, Chochmah Bina Das, then how would Reb Shlomo Karliner even think of asking him? Reb Shlomo knew that the stolen approach of screaming and shouting and shaking, it ain't going to fly with the Balatanya. So why would he even ask him? So it seems to me that's because it was not known. It was not known as a public commodity. And Reb Shlomo didn't know about it either. So he asked, sincerely, you asked me a question, I tell you what my sheet is. Now, Isser, what did you want to say?
I wanted to say that Moshe's question, I think, to you came up from a conversation that we were having as we were learning the Agiras HaKodesh, which was my question, I'll take credit for it, which is that it seems to me that when the Alter Rebbe was writing the Agiras HaKodesh, he was writing Stam to Hasidim, which is a very large term. And the question was, at what point, and it may be more of a question of other branches of Hasidus as opposed to Chabad, but at some point, Chabad became a unique structure and shita in Avodas Hashem. But when he was writing the Agiras HaKodesh, at least to me, it seems like he was writing to the masses of Hasidim wherever they were.
So, two points. I hear you, and I'm glad you made that point. One is the Agiras HaKodesh are a compilation of different letters from different years, could be 10 years apart. The first Agiras HaKodesh and the second one, I think, are mamish different years. right? The second Igeres HaKodesh, which is Katointi Mikol Achsodim, was written right after Yutas Kislev, which is 1798. The first one, I think is early or late. What I'm saying is that's number one, so you have to know that. So, in other words, the Igeres HaKodesh, some were written more. It's clear it's written more to Lubavitch Chassidim. For example, the second one, Katointi, he's telling them. Again, he doesn't use the word Chabad, but he's telling them don't take revenge of the Misnagdim. He doesn't use those words, but that's the Kulei Hai V'Ulai.
But the Misnagdim were against all of the Chassidim.
Yeah, good point, but we know that Katointi was written right after Yutas Kislev. And Yutas Kislev was, you're also right, for example, the Lechovich, the other tzaddikim, but Yutas Kislev was celebrated, this everyone will agree, by Chabad. Whether they like it, they don't like it, but Yutas Kislev became a Chabad Yom Tov. I asked the Slonimer Einikel of Rabbi Weinberg, Einikel, here, Ish Mechubad, why the Slonimer Chassidim didn't celebrate Yutas Kislev? Because the Lechovitcher, the holy Lechovitcher, was also imprisoned. So it wasn't just still I asked him the same thing. He says, I don't know. But what that means is that we're right in saying that only Chabad, or mostly Chabad, was the only ones who celebrated Yutas Kislev. So that Katointi is directed. It might be directed to everyone, but it was more to Chabad. That's our tradition and the support for that. But nevertheless, the Igeres HaKodesh that maybe you're referring to, where he speaks about giving tzedakah to Eretz Yisrael, again, if that particular letter was written, let's say in 1790, and at that time, the Alter Rebbe was already in charge, appointed by Reb Mendel Vitebske for the whole Belarusian region, I would agree with your position that it was to all. But so you have to really know when the dates are. Another point you have to know is that once 1798, 99, when Rabbi Avram Kalisker came out against the Alter Rebbe in Shita, it doesn't make sense that he wrote Igeres Kodesh to the Hasidim who are supporting Rabbi Avram Kalisker because they're not going to listen to him. And it was a very big disagreement. And the disagreement, by the way, impacted the Koil Chabad and the Koil, where you're giving the money to. So, I don't know if anyone has studied this, but it's something, it's a good point you're making. And we need to really know with more surety the dating of those Igeres HaKodesh, and it could be maybe Rabbi Shia Munshein or Sholem or someone else has already done that. I'll ask someone, but I do want to get back to Tanya. So going back to the point over here is that the Alter Rebbe says, because I feel that this idea of Kikori Velecha Adovim Yoid is relevant to each and every one of us, how do we go about it? So in his style of Chassidus, which is called Chabad, he says it requires two approaches. One approach he calls B'derech Arucha, a long way, to get Velvel from Cologne, to Brussels, to Antwerpen. There's a shortcut, and then there's a long way. And the Alter Rebbe says it's b'derech harucha k'tzara. That's a lashon haGemara. It's a Gemara, and the Alter Rebbe and the Alter Rebbe means two things. This the Rebbe explained once. Either it's one path, but it's a long, short path, or it's two different paths. But Pashtus, what we learned in Tanya is it's two paths. What's the two paths? One is the path from chapters 1, or better said, chapters 9 through 18. 9 chapters. In those 9 chapters, the Alter Rebbe develops the idea of the tzaddik, the Beinani, and the Rasha, primarily the Beinani. So from chapter 12 through 18, 6 chapters. I'm sorry, not 18, 17. Chapters 12 through 17, 5 chapters, he dedicates to the Beinani, because that's the thrust of the Sefer, the prototype, the average person, the potential average person. And he teaches us that if you refine yourself, and to refine yourself, he already explained in chapters 1 through 9 who we are, what are our faculties, what are our tools and instruments, the Levushi HaNefesh, the Etzem HaNefesh, the Koiches HaNefesh. That's all chapters 1 through 9, or through 8. And he explained that who we are. So once we know who we are, then we go to deal with the world we're in. And that was the Beinani primarily. And basically, the Rebbe says, Hashem says, Ki korev elecha adavim yoyed beficha uvelvavcha. You can speak, talk is cheap, action is loud and great, but as far as character and personality, it's not yet a demonstrative of who you are. Bilvavcha. What's going on with your heart? The midos, the emotions. Are you a mensch? Are you refined? You can be a flutin' tootin' intellectual and a big Talmud Chacham and a big professor, and you're an animal. But if you're a Bal Midas and you refine Bilvavcha, your heart, so then the question is, to refine the heart and the Midas is such a hard thing because we lose control. It's just a hard thing. The Alter Rebbe says, I know. So therefore, in chapter 16 of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe says, you know what I can expect of you, what Hashem can expect of you? Bilvavcha la'asoisai. That's where he says that the meaning in the verse is not pure heart palpitations of love for God, which is difficult and unattainable on a regular way, Avram, for the Beinani, but what's attainable for the Beinani daily is a feeling that leads to action. And he discusses that it's an intellectual feeling. I don't want to go over, that whole chapter 16. And he calls it over there, Klal Gadol. Remember, I think I told you that there are 3 times in Tanya, I believe, that it says Klal Gadol, twice or 3 times. One is in chapter 16. Because this idea of a rational type of love is a chiddush. It's a novelty. The Alter Rebbe's interpretation of the verse in Nitzavim, it's not that we're looking for pure heart, but we're looking for bilvavcha la'asoisai, enough of heart to stimulate action and behavior. That's a gewaldige chap. It's a gewaldige novelty. And really, just as an aside, that fits into today's whole psychology. And now they're into, what are they into? It's called, not neuroscience. There's this latest fad that everyone's talking about, all the speakers.
Neuroplasticity.
Yeah, neuroplasticity. Thank you. I'm sorry for laughing a little bit at it because it's like every few years we get something new to hang on, and all of a sudden all the speakers are in their talks. You'll hear neuroplasticity. It's like, what? Issa, you want to tell us what that is?
As much as I don't understand it, it's the ability of the brain to basically rewire itself.
Okay.
The brain is plastic meaning flexible.
Flexible, okay. I don't know, I see it as Moyer Shalot Alalei, but anyway, I'm not a bucket.
The brain can, change pathways and how connections are made.
Okay, well, Zaina, if that makes us happy and that answers all of our problems, great. Anyway, so this was chapter 16. Then the Alter Rebbe comes along in chapter 18 and he says something very important. He says, wait a minute. You're telling me that you have to use Mayach Shalat Alaleiv, mind over matter. And what if someone is weak in mind? He's not an intellectual. He's not the type to use his mind, but rather to act on impulses. How is he to control his Yetzer Hara? So then the whole scenario of Bilvavcha Lasoisai falls away. So you're telling that type of person, which are plenty of people, you're doomed. You're doomed because you're controlled by your Yetzer Hara, by your impulses. Says the Alter Rebbe in chapter 18 and 19, no, you're not. Because there's another way. This he calls Yoni B'derech Kitzara, right? The first way is Arucha, because you got to work using your mind. You have to think. You have to have the data. It's lots of work. You have to go to school and get tested and get your BA and get your MA and get your PhD and get your doctor. It's a line of Megillah. But in chapter 18 and 19, it says, because you have to create something. You have to create something of yourself. It's work. What if I don't have to create? All I have to do is reveal who I am, my natural self. It's much easier. So therefore, even the person who's not the type to use their seichel, because they don't use it much. That's not the way they're trained or wired, and etc. No excuse. You're a mensch. You're living. You have a neshama. You have what's called ava musuteres, hidden latent love. Reveal it. Be megala it. And he teaches in 1819 how and when is the gilui as it goes on throughout the chapters. So now, chapter 26, the Alter Rebbe says, okay. Now you would think we should finish the first part of Tanya, the Likutei Amorim, and that's it. And here the Alter Rebbe says there's still an issue. It's called outside interferences. And this is very important because I'm sure we've all asked ourselves, Hashem, God, I'm doing what you want. And I'm doing what the Torah says. And I'm doing what my wife says. And I still am stuck. That's what the Alter Rebbe addresses Moshe in chapters 26 through 34. 9 chapters, where he'll talk about the issues that interfere our avodas Hashem and what we can do about it. Now, I want to make it very clear that although I wrote a book, Tanya, on mental health, and I discussed at length these chapters as well, truth be said, the Alter Rebbe is speaking in chapter 26 through 34 to the Beinani, to the person who has gone through chapters 1 through 25. The Alter Rebbe is not talking, at least on the surface, to someone who's still stuck and controlled by his Yetzer Hara. He's talking to someone who's overpowered his Yetzer Hara in a sense. He has things in control, either through Mayach Shalat Alev or through the Ava Masateris. But he's thrown a curveball. What's the curveball? Sometimes it's being upset and depressed because of your past sins. Sometimes it's because of your ego. And all of these issues the Alter Rebbe discusses in this chapter. So therefore, it must be said clearly, when we talk about clinical depression, for someone to wave the Tanya and say, hey, learn the Tanya and your clinical depression will go away. That's nonsense. You need a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a therapist, a rabbi, medicine, whatever you need. Can the Tanya help? Absolutely. It can also help, but not as a substitute. The Alter Rebbe in chapter 26 is not coming to address someone who has clinical depression. I just want to make it clear. He's coming to address a very healthy person called a Beinani, Yoni, a person who's really worked on himself, on his midos, on his character. And all of a sudden he starts thinking, but I'm not good. I did this in my life, and I did this and I did that, and I feel awful. And he becomes upset about his averos. That's what he's addressing here in the beginning. You'll see soon. And the Alter Rebbe says that since we know that the Iker in Avodas Hashem is Simcha, without Simcha, your Avodah is lacking. You can't serve God as a rigid and frigid icicle. You can't. I mean, you could, but it's like it doesn't move you. It's all here. It doesn't make a difference inside. So here the question is, I feel crummy inside because of my past. And past doesn't mean only for Bali Tshuva. It means for every single Yid. Because if you can find me a Jew that hasn't committed sin, I'll give you a big star. You know what I'm saying? Everyone goes through life, and we have challenges, and we have issues from the right to the left to the center. And Baruch Hashem that we have an opportunity to grow out of it. And this is what the Alter Rebbe is saying over here, going to say, because I see we're almost out of time. The Alter Rebbe is going to teach us ways of accessing Simcha. So here it's another important point, Chevra, I want you to know and remember for the rest of your lives. That these chapters in Tanya are not Musar. In chapter 29, for example, we're going to hear some real, what sounds Musar-like stuff. It's not Musar. Chassidus. Forget about Chabad. All of Chassidus is not Musar. Okay? Musar, learn Mesilas Yesharim, Rabbeinu Yoina, Chayvas Halavavis, on and on. And it's very important, especially during Chodesh Elul. Chassidus is Baal Shem Tov. Baal Shem Tov is about Simcha. 1648, 1649, the Helmenitsky pogroms in Podolia devastated us not just physically, but mentally and spiritually. We were giving up. Holocaust. Yidden were giving up. What's going on here? Zu Torah v'zu schara. We just came from Tisha B'Av. We read about the 10 martyrs. This is Torah and this is the reward. So comes along the Baal Shem Tov and says, you have to change your entire way of thinking. And he introduces what's called Hasidism, philosophy of Chassidus, Torah Chassidus. And when you learn Torah Chassidus, be it in Breslev, being in Kotsk, being in Chabad, being in Boston, whatever, all the tzaddikim, we share all one thing in common. We're Talmidim of the Baal Shem Tov. And the Baal Shem Tov says, Ivdush Hashem b'simcha is key in Avodas Hashem. How that manifests, each group has its style. The Alter Rebbe, these 9 chapters, that's the nekuda he seeks to communicate, is how to have simcha in your life. And not to be depressed because of your past sins. And not to be depressed because of your middle davening. You're thinking about, what's for supper? I got to run to the studio. What's going to be with this patient? Are my stocks up and down? And then you say, oy vey, it's Chodesh Elul. It's Dalet Elul. That's the way I davened this morning? Disgusting. What kind of Jew am I? Who am I fooling? Maybe I just continue being this pagan glutton and continue living it up. What do I need? What do I need all this? Says the Alter Rebbe in these chapters, I'll help you find ways of rejecting these negative thoughts. And this is very, very important because the negative thoughts are constant. If someone is serious, Velvel, if someone is a serious person, then these thoughts bother them. You understand? If you're not serious and you don't care about anything and you just do what you want, then all of these thoughts are garnished. Right? But if you're serious, and we're serious because we want to serve Hashem. Serious doesn't mean not happy and depressed. No. That's not serious. Serious means you take things, you're mature. You know it makes a difference. The Frierdiker Rebbe writes at the end of, not at the end, the middle of the Maim of Basili Gani. Ein Adam, quotes the Gemara, Ein Adam Yodeya Ita V'zmana, a person doesn't know his time. When will be his last day, right? You can look at it and say, oh, how depressing, right? And then you can say, no, how uplifting. So what am I doing about it today? There's no time to waste. There's just no time to waste. Every moment has to be accounted for. So I'm going to work. How am I going to work? What music am I playing in my car? What do I read on the train from Tel Aviv to Yerushalayim, etc.? Now with the new train to Petach Tikva and then Ramat Gan, whatever. What am I reading? Am I looking at everything around me, which you shouldn't be looking at because there's a lot of not kosher things to look at? What are you thinking about? What are you reading? So it's in those everyday issues that the Alter Rebbe talks to us. And that's why Tanya, the Sefer of Tanya, is such a valuable sefer in helping the average person in his daily life deal with the curveballs that come to us, the inadequate feelings that come to us, the ego that comes to us and says, me? You know who I am? I'm God's gift to humanity, and you want to put me down? Right? So in chapter 30, the Alter Rebbe wipes you away and says, you're God's gift to humanity, you're such a yesh, and you're so spoiled. You were raised on the street corners? You were raised in Wall Street or the Upper East Side, and you think you're a Yad Shem Adam, or maybe you were a Hasidic boy. I just heard, I'm interviewing someone who told me that about a certain Rebbe, don't want to say who. He was his friend when he was a little boy, 8 years old, 7 years old, 9 years old. His father wouldn't let him go out of the house on Shabbos. He didn't want him to see the goyishkeit all around him. Okay, that was his father's decision. He becomes a Rebbe. He's very holy, very, very nice. But on the other hand, and I'm just saying it's like, what else should he do? He didn't go out of the house. He didn't see anything. So what? You understand? Who is more refined? Someone who saw the world and tasted from the world and rejected the world and becomes a true Baal Teshuvah in his Nafshe Pnima, where he's disgusted with all those things that once he tasted and once he lived and once he did, and he says, ugh, it's not who I am, right? Who is higher? Says the Gemara, b'makom shebali tshuva oimdim, ein tzadikim gemurim oimdim sham. Tzadikim gemurim, tzadikim, great rabbis and tzadikim, they can't compare to a Baal Teshuvah. And the reason is because I just said, so you can stay in your house all Shabbos. Great. I'm not saying that doesn't mean that the person isn't a tzaddik today and the person shouldn't go to him. I'm not saying that, but I just want you to understand. It's like a friend of mine said about another friend's mother who had numbers on her arm. She was a survivor from Auschwitz. And he said, we can go to ask her for a bracha. She is as holy as any Rebbe. Anyone that went through the Holocaust and has a number on their hand, it doesn't mean only a number, but they paid their dues. They've paid their dues, and I don't know if it's right saying this, not right saying, but a soldier who's in the Israeli army, he's frum or not frum, but he goes on the front to help Yidden. Remember who you're talking to. You're talking to a Baal Mesiras Nefesh, because they can kill you right there and then, as we know. And the soldier, he put himself aside for Am Yisrael, not for Tzahal, for Am Yisrael at the end of the day, for the Jewish people, is so holy. And that's why the Rebbe loved the soldiers. And the Rebbe didn't say, does he put on tefillin? Are they sleeping together? Is it tznius? He didn't say any of that. The Rebbe didn't say that. The Rebbe said, go give them Chanukah geld. Go give them suganiyot. Go dance with them. Because at the end of the day, we're sitting in Bet Shemesh and in Yerushalayim and all over and there in Gaza or in Golan defending us and putting their lives on the line. You know, it's and the Alter Rebbe is creating the mechanism here how to access this daily. So when we learn these chapters, we'll learn tomorrow in Shem Begin, we have ammunition to have Simcha in our lives, which is the Iker, the way to approach Elul. And I want to finish, I don't know if you saw the video I made this past week, because I spoke to the son, to three sons of a very big Litvish Rosh Hashiva. I was researching something. And I wanted to speak to one particular son who they told me might know the answer, because they didn't know. So one of the sons says, but you can't get to him. I said, why not? I got to all three of you. He says, because he doesn't speak in Chodesh Elul. So I said, but it's not yet Chodesh Elul. It was Lamed Av. It was the first day Rosh Chodesh, but it was the 30th above. I said, he's so frum that he begins not speaking already on the first day of Rosh Chodesh. And he says, I guess he's so frum. So I spoke about it, the difference between the way Chabad, Chassidim Bechlal and Chabad as well, look at Chodesh Elul and the way Litvish look at Chodesh Elul. It's the same Chodesh Elul, but it's two different approaches. And it's not that Chabad and Chassidim will want to speak gossip. My father told me that in Lud, in his yeshiva, by Rabbi Chaim Dalfin, the Lubavitch yeshiva, which he was there from 50 to 58, I remember he telling me this like every year, Elul time. We used to be more serious. There were more Bachar davening, ba'arichos at more length, and we spoke less Lashon Hara, and we spoke less in general. I remember growing up hearing that. So Chabad also, serious Chabad did that. But the issue is how you go about it. So when the Rebbe Rashab was brought, this is what they say, I don't have proof to it. They brought the Sefer, they told the Rebbe Rashab about the Sefer Shmiras HaLoshen from the Holy Chofetz Chaim, which the Chofetz Chaim Foundation today has made this big, huge campaign of anti-Lashon Hara and Tainas Dibur and all of that. So they asked the Rebbe Rashab, what do you say about the Sefer? And they say that the Rebbe Rashab said it's a very good, and it's very important not to speak Lashon Hara and to be informed of what is and what's not, especially Moshe when it comes to Shidduchim and you want to find out about parents, about the girl, about the boy. Boy, can you get involved in Lashon Hara? It's very easy. And what did Rebbe Rashab said? By us, we do Shmiras HaMachshava. We put the emphasis on Shmiras HaMachshava, not Shmiras HaLoshen. It's an attitude. It's an approach. Both approaches are valid, but this is the what the Rashab said. So the Elul of a Chassid, of course, to minimize Lashon Hara, and of course, to minimize by speaking, but not, like, a Tainas Dibur. It's get involved in more of Hashem. In other words, find out who God is this month. Learn more about Hashem. Learn Chassidus, Torah Baal Shem Tov. And automatically you won't have time to speak and gossip and narishkeit. Versus, no, we're just going to put a zip on our mouth. Whatever. That's all. That's all. So every Yid can choose what they feel the path. And trust me, we have to minimize our Lashon Hara, especially this month. Not to talk about people. You sit at the Shabbos table, the easiest thing is, it happens many times on my table. You end up speaking about this person, that, but what did he say, what did she say? And it ultimately leads to Lashon Hara, to not good. It's very alluring, right? It's very easy to so you have to be careful. Okay, Chevra, you would like to say anything, or we'll continue tomorrow? I guess we'll continue tomorrow.
One thing, Rabbi.
Yes.
One thing.
One thing, go
I
ahead.
wish everybody. Today's my Jewish birthday. I want to
Ah.
everybody only bracha hatzlacha, and only all the good, brachas that Hashem has to offer.
Amen.
Only those things.
Amen. We wish you, Yoini, we wish you happy 18th birthday.
Amen.
And you should always stay young, and always help Yidden, and bring Simcha to Yidden, and share your connection to Chabad Lubavitch with others, and just be a living example of a Yid that's on the right track and doesn't get involved with shtusim, and stay focused, and don't allow the shtusim to interfere with your avodas Hashem.
Amen.
Sei gesund. Good day. We'll see everyone tomorrow. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Okay.